Hello, active farmers, and welcome to our second health related workshop as part of our Spring into 2021 program. You guys are going to love this. Today, we have got Mary O'Brien joining us from Are You Bogged, Mate? She's the founder and CEO, and I have done a Q&A session to share with you. So you will learn about Mary's upbringing, her background, why she started Are You Bogged, Mate, and what it is trying to achieve. It is a perfect match with what Active Farmers is trying to achieve. She's passionate, she's driven, she's genuine, down to earth, and she's on a mission to try and save more rural men's lives. And she has adopted a way to speak about mental health in a way that relates to rural men and is really easy to understand. And she does also share some really practical tips about what to do if you're worried about someone and some things that might show up if someone isn't doing that well. So enjoy, guys, and if you would like to learn more about Are You Bogged, Mate, just jump onto her website, Are You Bogged, Mate, and all the information will be there. I hope you enjoy the Q&A as much as I did. Well, welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to start with a first question. If you could tell us where you grew up and what you wanted to be when you were a child.
It's probably very far removed from where I am now. I grew up on a sheep and cattle station in southwest Queensland, 100 k's south of a little town called Bollen. And when I was a small child, and even as a teenager, I actually wanted to be a fashion designer, which I have no fashion sense whatsoever. Fashion designer, art teacher, or English teacher, which is a little bit ridiculous now when you look at my life.
How funny. Well, I suppose you're just expressing your creative flair in a different way, perhaps.
Yes, it certainly gets a laugh out of the blokes when if I ever mention that I wanted to be a fashion designer, they look at me in my work jeans and top boots and King G work shirt and they're like, really? So yeah, it's probably just not me.
And what was the community like? What was it like living there?
It was really good, actually. It was a really strong community, and obviously not a lot of people there, but yeah, the sense of community was really strong, and people chipped in, and didn't matter what committee it was, everybody was on it, and yeah, it was a great little community, actually.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And so, we all know that you're very passionate about the ag industry. Could you tell me a little bit about why you're so passionate? What is it that makes you so interested and so driven about the industry and the people that are involved in that?
Look, I think agriculture is very misunderstood right across Australia and across the world, really. I think people don't understand what these people do and how they do it. They just see articles or whatever and assume the worst. I think society sets a very high benchmark for agriculture. Across society, we accept that there are bad hairdressers and bad doctors and bad or not the best operators in many professions, mechanics, hairdressers, etc. But when it comes to agriculture, everybody expects farmers to be up here, and that's not reality in any profession. There are some who fall below the line, and I guess agriculture seems to constantly get called out for those few that are below the line, rather than really looking at the innovation and technology and science that goes into it, and how many are above the line really across the board in all Australian agriculture. So I'm really passionate about the sustainability and the longevity of this industry, and that's in livestock, cropping, fisheries, all of the different primary production sectors. But I think the real strength of the agricultural industry in Australia are the people and their resilience and their ingenuity and their humour and their sense of community and their passion for what they do. And I think you can't help but be infected by their passion when you're around them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, ultimately these are the people that are feeding and clothing our country. And it is sad when perhaps the limelight is shone on ones that do fall through the cracks a little bit, and not focused enough on all the amazing ones out there that are feeding and clothing everyone. Yeah. So a really important point. And so so through your, I want to focus mostly on what you're doing now, but I do think it's important to go back through a little bit of history. So could you tell me, from leaving school or leaving the farm, I know you went to boarding school, but say from finishing boarding school, how have you got to where you are today? What sort of things have you done over the year that has led you to where you are today?
I guess the best explanation might be it's been a long and windy road. When I finished school, I went home and worked out west. I was a Jillaroo, I was a governess. I was part of a landmarking and mulesing contracting team. I did mustering. I did all sorts of things. Drove heavy earth moving machinery as well. Like just a bit of everything, I guess. And in the late 80s, early 90s, when wool really just fell through the floor and we had the massive wool stockpile, things got pretty tough out there. It was mainly a sheep and wool area. And so I moved to the city and thought, what am I going to do for a job? Like, I don't have any skills to get a job in the city. And so I just looked into getting qualifications. And so I did a heap of short courses, and eventually a friend of mine convinced me to do a degree at university. And so I did that part-time, what felt like for the best part of my life. But I managed to get through that, and then got a job with the Queensland Department of Primary Industries in biosecurity, and then did some postgrad study and furthered that on, and ended up with a master's in agriculture, and worked for the Queensland government, and then went out on my own doing the spray application stuff. And yes, pretty much for the last 6 or 8 months, the bogged mate stuff has been full time. So it's been a bit of a zigzaggy path. There's no nice straight line, I guess.
Yeah, so you've gone from fashion designer to boarding school, back to your roots, back to the city, and then back to your roots again. Yeah. And so when you went to boarding school, what was it that drew you back out west to return?
I guess family and the people and the lifestyle. It's certainly it's hard to leave it when you grow up in that in those communities, to live in the city and have that sort of what seems like a coldness, I guess, around you, and neighbours don't talk to you, and I guess there's downsides to those small communities too, where everybody knows what's going on, and so there's pros and cons, but it's I really don't like being in the city at all now, at all. There's no quiet, there's no stillness. So yeah, I quite like that in the countries, that being able to find that time and space to be still and just hear nothing, I guess, or just hear the natural sounds rather than freeways.
Yeah. I think it really does become ingrained in who you are.
Yeah, and it's just simple things like observing the plants. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to semi-arid plants in Australia, so whenever I go into a new area, I'm always going, oh, I wonder what sort of tree that is. And yeah, just the unique animals and the scenery, and taking that time, I guess, to, the old saying of stop and smell the roses. Well, I like to just stop and watch the sunsets, or check out the trees, or whatever it is that's in the landscape that I'm in.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And so I want to ask now, what was the light bulb moment for Are You Bogged, Mate? Can you talk me through like how that actually came to be? Was there like a moment in time where you just went, this is it, or was it a gradual thing? Like how did it come to be?
Well, it came about, unfortunately, from 2 suicides in the Darling Downs region, and watching the men that I knew around that area come to terms with the loss of their mates. And it was a bit of a reality check for me too, that I didn't have any skills in this and I didn't know anything about it. And I still don't have any skills in this really. I asked myself the question of how would I know who's next? So if I was talking to a bloke, because my work was taking me through most of the major agricultural broadacre regions of Australia, and I thought, what if I'm talking to a bloke and he's the next one that's going to take his life and I can't tell? How do I upskill myself in that space? So that's essentially what I went looking for, was courses or training or information about how to identify the signs and symptoms. And in doing that, I found pretty horrific statistics. And I also found what I perceived to be an attitude from the experts and organisations and so on, that there's something wrong with these men in rural Australia, that we need to change them. And I didn't really like that very much. I think they're fine. And I guess having a reasonable amount of experience in extension, I could just see that they weren't communicating with them the way that they understand things or the way that they need to be communicated with. So they're a pretty unique demographic in the way that they learn and absorb information and take things on board. And so that's all. I was just frustrated, I guess, that I wanted to put the mental health stuff into a terminology that maybe that they understood. And essentially when I wrote the article, it was mainly just to go into bat for them and to stand up for them and to say, hey, these blokes are okay, you just don't understand them. And so that was where I wrote the article. And I guess the light bulb moment for the bogged analogy was actually talking to some rural men and talking about these guys that we had lost in the Darling Downs area. And, you know, this concept of being bogged down, so bogged down that you would contemplate taking your own life. And I actually said to these fellows, it is like getting bogged, isn't it? When you get bogged, you have to ask for help. And they all were just quite horrified and sort of said, oh, no, when we get bogged, we don't want to tell anybody. If we bog a machine, we don't want to tell anybody. And I thought, yeah, this actually makes sense to me and it's making sense to them. So that's where the analogy came from, to consider it in I guess, that context of being bogged. But and again, I simply wrote that article to express my support for rural men, and I never set out to start anything. I never expected the response that I got. It just blew my mind.
Where did you write this article? How did this article become viral, if you like?
Well, I was at the time, one of my contracts that I was doing, a part-time contract, was working with a national ag magazine, just gathering a few stories and doing a little bit of editorial stuff. And after we lost these two guys, I said to this editor, I think we need to do a story on mental health. And he was very supportive of it and said, yes, I totally agree. Yeah. Who are we going to get to write it? And I said, I don't know. I'll find someone who knows what they're talking about. And I was, I guess, looking online as well for people to write something and trying to find someone who I thought knew what they were talking about. And turns out I didn't find what I was looking for, and in my frustration wrote the article myself. And so it was initially written for this magazine, Ag Magazine, and it was a little bit longer than they wanted, but anyway, they ran with it, which was wonderful, and was very popular. And I also put the story on my business website and had to get my daughter to help me put another page on the website and things like that with my low IT skills. But when I did get it on the website, I then put the link on Twitter. Because of what I do in the spray world, I've got a few followers on Twitter, and I put the link on there and simply shared it through Twitter. And initially, and it just, yeah, the response was mind-blowing, to say the least. I have farmers around the world who follow me because of the spray stuff, but yeah, it seemed to make sense to the men around the world, particularly in the rural sector, not just me, what I'd written. So it just grew from there. I certainly didn't set out to start any great movement. It was essentially just an opinion piece.
From genuine care of these people.
With a few swear words thrown in.
But you obviously have really hit a nerve with a way to communicate with rural men, which is essentially a huge part of what you're doing with Are You Bogged Mate? Because it's not always easy to do that. So what sort of terminal, and do you think using, you've got your picture there with the tractor being bogged and someone trying to pull it out, do you think using terminology like that is the reason that people can sort of latch on and understand and get what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think if we put it into practical, useful terms and analogies, and I've always used a lot of analogies to try and explain things, explain complex scientific or technical stuff. And I think it's a bit of the visual stuff as well. So rural men tend to be very visual learners. So they don't necessarily, the majority of them don't necessarily learn by reading. So rather than give them the manual to the tractor, you're better off to put them in the tractor and show them what to do. So I guess that's the approach I'm taking with this. It's just being visual, using that terminology of the bogged, and that they understand that. And I think all rural people do, the women as well, that sometimes we can get ourselves through those rough patches or those sticky patches on the road by using our four-wheel drive and our winch and things like that. But then there's times when the machine is too big and too heavy and too bogged that we can't do that. And that's when we have to ask others to help us. And using that analogy of, that's when we need to talk to our family and friends, our GP or a psychologist or a counsellor, these other services that can help us out of that situation. That tends to make sense.
Yeah, just really simplifying it. Yeah. And relating it to something that's so normal.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, one of the things I'm really trying to do with this is normalise it, that everybody gets bogged at some stage. Now, whether that's badly bogged or just even a little bit, I don't think there's anybody on the planet who has every single thing in their life has gone perfectly and just the way they planned it or wanted it to. That's not life and it's not reality. So it's really just normalising it that we all have those times. Some of us have more than others, and some people get through them quite well, others not so much. So it's just normal. It's just part of life.
Definitely. Yeah. And so we know that rural men are at very high risk of taking their lives to suicide comparatively to the rest of the country. Do you have any thoughts around why that is that you could share with us?
I think there's probably a few reasons. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but from where I see it, I think we are looking at that classic stoic Australian male where they still see it as a weakness to go and get that support and that help when they are bogged. We are also looking at access to services being limited, and that's a massive problem, that the support and information is just not there for these guys. And I think there's one of the downsides to being in these small communities is that everybody knows what's going on. Everyone knows your business. And I often say to people, because I actually have a lot of psychologists and experts who contact me now who have funding in that to go to a rural town and set up a practice. And I just say to them, that's not going to work. Like they're not going to come into the local town, most of them aren't, and park outside your office, because if they went and parked outside the pub for 3 days, everybody would know what they were doing. So if they go and park outside your office, everyone's going to know what they're doing. And I guess they're still quite private about that. And that's fair enough. They don't have to shout it from the rooftops if they need that support. But I think this is where the services are, I guess, lacking in this in this space, they're not going to connect with these blokes by setting up an office in the main street of the little town.
Yeah, and I heard once of a little community where there was sort of like a hub with dentist, physio, psychologist, GP, and they all shared the same waiting room. And so, obviously not many people are going to feel comfortable sitting in the waiting room and be called into that, into that room. Yeah. So sort of these barriers are quite significant and they're real.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, look, everyone's, and all, I guess I feel like society's trying to change these men, and I don't know if that's necessarily what we need to do. I think they're fine the way they are, and it's okay for them to be masculine. It's okay for them to be stoic, because they are some of the really great qualities about these men and men in general. So I don't know if we need to go out there and change all this. I think we need to change the way they can access these services, but also change that conversation around it and normalise it. But we can't just go out there and change these men in one generation. This is, these are qualities that have been in men forever, since, prehistoric times. And these are some of the really wonderful qualities about men. So I think we actually have to address the fact that they are men and they are a unique demographic, rather than trying to change them to fit them into the mould that society or the textbook wants them to fit into. That they don't fit into it. And you're not going to make them in one generation, I can assure you.
Yeah, and I think, they do make up quite a small proportion of the population, but they really matter, and shouldn't be categorized, try to make fit into a different bucket that has more people in it.
Yeah, they do. They definitely are important. And I think one of the important things with rural male suicide, or suicide in general anyway, but particularly in these small rural areas, is that suicide doesn't just impact the family and close friends. It ripples throughout the whole community and into the next community. So that's a huge flow-on effect, and that really impacts on, I guess, the whole heart of these communities and how they function, and the viability into the future as well, because we're losing a lot of young men. And whether the feminists like it or not, agriculture is a male-dominated industry in so much as that hard physical labour. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of women out there doing hard physical labour as well, but the vast majority are men. So this is actually quite important to the ongoing sustainability of agriculture in the big picture.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I did want to just cover off as well, Mary, is the fact that you are you can't be all things to all people, and you're is these rural men, and you have worked for basically your entire career with these men, and you've grown to work with them and understand them and work out ways to communicate with them. And so, the women are equally as important, but you have found your little niche in helping communicate with these men, which I think is really fantastic. And I congratulate you for doing that. And
thank you.
And so, how do we know who's next, or do you have any little warning signs that we could be looking out for, or what could we be doing better as a community to notice if someone's not doing okay? I mean, I know a lot of these communities, it's harder to keep an eye on people because there's not as much opportunity perhaps as there once was to catch up regularly, or there may not be enough incidental catch-up opportunities. So sometimes it's very easy for people to just slip away, or you may run into them and they can put on a brave face, but how do we make sure that we know that people are okay, or do our best to try and make sure we know?
Yeah, there's a heap of lists of signs and symptoms that we can look for, and people can find that on the Are You Bogged Mate website or any mental health website, Beyond Blue, Lifeline, etc. They all have a list of some of those things to look for. But some of the things that really stick out to me, and particularly for rural men, would be those significant changes in behaviour. So a very common one that I hear a lot is he was cleaning out the shed and giving stuff away. Now, cleaning out the shed might be very normal for some people, but others it's not. And I guess that's where I encourage people to ask those questions of what's going on, or make yourself available to listen, because giving stuff away in particular, it's like they're organising. They're getting organised, ready to check out. So any changes in behaviour, and I guess that's why I ask the communities and the people in rural Australia to look out for these and learn what these signs and symptoms are, because they're the front line and they're getting to see this firsthand. They will know when there's changes in behaviour in their family, their friends and their work colleagues. So anything that they normally do and then they stop doing, or they start doing something different, that's any of those sort of warning signs. So if they normally catch up with family and friends a lot, and then they've stopped doing that, they've stopped going out, they're isolating themselves from it. Another one is, particularly for the young men, is quitting activities that were previously important to them. So that's things like the young man who's always played for the local footy team and then stops for no particular reason. So these are the sort of things where we need to start asking questions. And when we go to these people to ask this, we can lead with those, the facts. I've noticed this. You've stopped playing footy. You're cleaning out your shed and giving stuff away. I want you to talk to me. Is everything okay? So it's those facts, I guess. Let's talk about the facts. Let's not ask them how they're feeling. Let's talk about the facts first to get that ball rolling. And that's probably one of the key things for men, is that they'll talk about the facts before they'll talk about the feelings. So we'll get to the feelings, but you've got to talk about the facts first. So learning those signs and symptoms, I think, is really important for all of our communities, and especially our rural ones, to keep an eye out for those things and start asking questions and be available and learn to be a good listener. I have a lot of men who ask me, I know my mate's in trouble, but I don't know what to do. And I guess one of my things is just listen. You don't have to know what to say. You don't have to know what to do, but just be available and listen. So, yeah, there's a heap of signs and symptoms out there, but it's mainly a change in behaviour. One of the other things I see frequently is that the men that we lose are often the happiest bloke. Oh, he was the happiest bloke I knew. He always had a smile on his face. He always turned up to do things. So they're often community leaders in, they're the president of the local footy club, and they're also the president of this, and they're the secretary for that. And it's like they're almost trying to fill their lives with other things rather than deal with what they've got. So it's, I guess it's changes in behaviour. And some of them can be very slight. Some of them may only have one thing that they're doing that might be a sign or a symptom. And a lot of people say to me, I didn't know that. And that was my son, or that was my brother, or that was my dad. All of those signs and symptoms were there, but I didn't know what to look for.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for sharing. They're really practical things to look out for that everyone can do. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I want to just quickly talk about prevention. So do you have any tips for ways that people can look after their health from a preventative way? So they may be totally fine at the moment, but maybe down the track they do get bogged. What can rural men be doing to better equip themselves for tough times down the track?
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter what aspect of health we're talking about, whether it's physical health, mental health. Early intervention is always the best remedy, and we know that with most health conditions. So I encourage people to look after that before they get to that bog point. So what are the things that people do to unwind, to recharge, to offload? Now, for men, that can be quite different to women, and men can actually take a lot longer to unwind and recharge. So this is where I get in a fair bit of trouble, because I just say to blokes, go fishing. If you need to go fishing for 3 days, go fishing for 3 days. What is it you do? I think women are often a bit better at downloading our stuff or having a whinge or getting stuff off our chest. But men, in particular rural men, I have had so many say to me, even if I go to the coast for a holiday or wherever I go, it takes me 3 days to unwind. And, then they sort of actually start to enjoy it and things like that. So maybe they need a week fishing. I don't know, camping, whatever it is you do. For me, it's gardening, also driving. I like driving. But, yeah, I just go out in the garden and get my hands dirty. For some people, it's reading. For some people, it's, spending time with their family. It might be golf. Whatever it is that you do, you actually have to prioritise that, because particularly for men, they're very focused on looking after everybody else rather than themselves. And we see that with their physical health as well as their mental health. So they have to prioritise that, to look after themselves first, so that they are at their best to be able to look after others. Because looking after others is one of the great attributes of men, that they like to have everything done for everybody else and help others. And yeah, if they don't look after themselves properly, they're not performing at their best.
Yeah. So actually prioritizing time to have some time out. I did pick up that you might quite enjoy driving, because you do live in Dalby in Queensland, and you do seem to be here, there, and everywhere. I think you must quite like driving. Yeah. Okay. So, and from a physical health perspective, do you recommend that they like to do a bit of exercise? We're a bit big on that with active farmers.
Yes, I'm probably not your best example of active and doing exercise, but we know that that's better for us. We know that we feel better. We know that releases the endorphins and all the other buzzwords that make us feel good about ourselves. And I guess for me, my active and exercise is in the garden with a shovel, or whatever it is, pushing the lawnmower. That's my exercise, and I probably don't do enough of that, let's be fair. But it's, those are the things. Some people are into team sports. Some people are into doing things by themselves. So whether that's going for a walk, or, taking the dogs for a walk down to the dam, or it doesn't have to be, for me anyway, a formal exercise, if that doesn't suit or it's inconvenient or too far. But it's getting out and doing that, whatever it is, to clear your head. And exercise can certainly be a great way to clear your head, but it also has obviously heaps of other health benefits.
Yeah. Had to throw that question in there. And I think, if they do struggle with finding time to do that, finding a mate to do something with is even better.
Yeah, okay. And that's one of the benefits of the Active Farmers program, is that they get to be with other people. If that's one of the things that they do to recharge, social people like to be social and be around other people, and doing stuff together like that's a great way for them to re-energise and recharge.
And I do think that in terms of noticing changes in behaviour, I suppose one of the theories with active farmers is that, then you do get to see people on a weekly basis, and therefore you're more likely to notice if they stop coming, or something doesn't seem the same. Yeah. So, do you have any favourite mottos that you might be able to share with us as we start to wrap up?
I've got a few, and probably my favourite of all time, and it's been mine for a very long time, and it probably applies to the bog thing too. And I believe it was Henry Ford who said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way you are right. So I think that's, and that's a little bit about what I talk about, is when we're bogged, that we actually have to hold up our side of the bargain. We have to actively do something to help ourselves. We can't just hand our bucket of crap to somebody else and get them to fix it. There's plenty of people who want to help us carry it, but we have to hold up our side. So I guess having a bit of that mindset of whether you think you can or you think you can't, whichever way you perceive that, you are correct.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Now I had one more question. So with Mary's service offering, she does lots of workshops in person, and I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that you like to be able to do these workshops in person because then you can eyeball the audience. So why is that such an imperative part of what you do, so that you can actually be there and eyeball? What impact do you think that has?
Again, it comes back to probably the way these blokes engage and learn and listen. So the vast majority of them won't sit down and watch webinars or listen to podcasts and things like that. They're very much more practical, hands-on. But I also get to see the truth when I'm standing in front of them and looking at them. And I often actually have men who get very emotional because I hand out the buckets during my talk and talk about what's been dumped in your bucket. And men will often have in their head what they're going to say. Like I'm going to say I had a flat tire or something. And then when you actually get to look them in the eye and ask them, then they frequently actually choke up, and it's not the flat tire, it's something else. Or probably the most powerful part of it is the conversations that they come and have with me afterwards, that they have found that safe space to unload. And so it's often the conversations I have afterwards that are probably the most powerful, that they come and tell me stuff that they've never told anybody before. Being able to see the look in their eyes when something I say makes sense to them, or they feel heard. It's you can't get that on a Zoom meeting, I'm afraid. So you can't see the whole audience. You can't read their response. You can't see whether they're engaged or listening, or whether they've even left the room. So I think one of the things with this that's really important to me is to be that boots on the ground and in their comfort zone, because I'm going to their comfort zone. It's not dragging them out of the country and taking them to the city, to an office or a couch or whatever in a expert's office. It's often in sheds. It's at a rodeo grounds or a camp draft grounds or a shearing shed, or somewhere that's that they're quite comfortable.
Yeah.
And they can turn up in their work clothes, and then they can come and have a yarn to me, and they can talk to other blokes as well. They can ask questions either during or after. So I think it's just more powerful to be there in person in their comfort zone.
And I'm just blown away by how much you care, that you are willing to drive all across the countryside so that you can be there and eyeball these men who really matter. So I just think it's absolutely incredible. And
I think I'm actually the lucky one, because I get to see some amazing parts of the country, but I also get to see firsthand what they're dealing with. So whether I'm going to drought-affected areas or bushfire-affected areas, I actually get to see firsthand what they're up against, and that gives me a better perspective as well. So I actually think I'm fortunate to be able to do that. Yeah,
definitely. And I'm glad that you know how to recharge as well with your gardening, because I can imagine it's a lot to have on your shoulders, and hear so many stories. So it's great that you've got some out as well. Yeah. Okay. So Mary, if there's anyone who's watching this who thinks, yep, I want to get Mary to drive all the way down to my little town, how do we go about that? Do we go to the website and get in touch with you there?
Yeah, it's best to go to the Are You Bogged Mate website, and you can submit a contact form through that. There's social media and so on, but it's probably easier if it all goes through the website. It would be my preference, but I do have a bit of a plan of where I'm going throughout the country. So currently I'm in South Australia, and then next month I'm off to Tasmania, and I think it's October I'm heading to the central west of New South Wales, and September I think Northern Territory. So if we can tie it into a bit of a run, it makes it a lot more cost effective to get around to these places rather than sort of run from Alice Springs down to Wagga, or it's
Yeah,
we'll make it make it a bit of a road trip of it. It makes it more worth worth the miles as well. So get to get more people in that area. So
so people can jump on your website, have a look at your bit of a timeline, and go from there.
So there's an upcoming events page on the website as well, and so if they're looking for anything in their area, hopefully I can get the next lot of events up there soon, so that they can see what's happening in Tasmania next month as well, and some of the other events that are on.
That's amazing, and hopefully this is the first of many things that we can do with you, Mary, because we absolutely love what you do. It is such important work, and ultimately we're both working to achieve the same goal. And so congratulations for everything you're doing, and thank you so much for your time with us now.
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks for the great work you do with active farmers too. It's awesome.
Oh, thank you.